Chicago, November 22nd, 1905, 5:30 p.m. Twilight descends on Prairie Avenue. The wind from Lake Michigan lashes the windows of the mansions that locals call palaces. This is not just a street. It is the epicenter of American capitalism, where more money is concentrated on 1 square kilometer than in the treasuries of most European states. In the house numbered 1919, a massive building of red brick and sandstone, it is quiet. This is the residence of Marshall Field, a man whose name is known to every resident of Illinois. Inside are 30 servants who move silently, like shadows. The silence in this house is not a sign of peace, but a sign of discipline. At 5:30, the perfect silence is broken by a sound like a whip cracking against metal. It is not a loud explosion, but a dry, sharp pop. The sound comes from the second floor, from the dressing room adjoining the bedroom of the Empire's heir. The valet, whose name will remain a blurred spot in police reports, is the first to rush up the stairs. The door is open. The smell of smokeless powder, acrid, metallic, has already begun to permeate the heavy velvet curtains and Persian carpets. On the floor, doubled over in pain, lies a 37-year-old man. This is Marshall Field, Jr., the only son of Chicago's richest man, heir to a fortune that, adjusted to modern rates, exceeds $2.5 billion. He is still conscious. His hands are pressed to his left side, just below the ribs. Through his fingers, staining the snow-white shirt, dark, venous blood pulses out. Nearby, on the parquet floor, lies a .32 caliber automatic revolver. The weapon that, according to the official version, he was simply cleaning before a hunt. But experienced hunters know, no one cleans a loaded weapon with the barrel pointed at their own liver. The servants do not call the police. The first rule of the field house is protecting the reputation. They call Dr. Frank Billings, a luminary of Chicago medicine and the family's trusted physician. Only after that is the message relayed to the master of the house. At this moment, Marshall Field Sr. is in his office downtown, in that very legendary department store that bears his name. He is 71 years old. He is the architect of modern retailing, the man who invented the concept of the customer is always right. But when he is told the news, he understands. Today, the customer is not right. Today, fate has presented him with a bill that cannot be paid by check. He heads home. His carriage, or automobile, as progress is already marching down the streets, races through the cold November evening. When the king of retail crosses the threshold of his mansion on Prairie Avenue, the atmosphere changes instantly. The servant's panic disappears. Icy control emerges. Field Sr. looks at his dying son, at the blood on the carpet, at the revolver. His face is a mask. He does not ask questions like, "How did this happen?" He gives orders. The house is sealed tight. No reporters, no police inspectors in the first critical hours. The city's best doctors begin to converge on the mansion, but their task is not only to save a life, but also to preserve the secret. The diagnosis is made quickly. The bullet pierced the liver and lodged in the back muscles. The wound is fatal. In 1905, abdominal surgery is a lottery with 1 chance in 100. Over the next hour, a disinformation machine is launched that will work flawlessly. Newspapers owned by Field's friends are already preparing morning headlines. Words like assassination or suicide are forbidden. There is only one permitted phrase: tragic accident. However, while the doctors prepare their instruments and Field Sr. stands by the window, gazing at the dark street, a dissonance arises. Policemen patrolling the red light district a few blocks away whisper about something else. About a shot that rang out not in the mansion, but in the Everleigh Club, America's most expensive brothel. About how the wounded heir was secretly transported out through the back door so he wouldn't die surrounded by courtesans. But here, in the mansion on Prairie Avenue, the walls know how to keep silent. There is no place for dirt here. Here, the prince of the retail empire is dying, and his death must be as impeccable as the display windows of his father's department store. This evening marks not just the fight for Marshall Field Jr.'s life. It marks the greatest operation to cover up evidence in Chicago's history. On this night, November 22nd, residents of neighboring houses, the Pullmans, Kimballs, Glessners, see only the light burning in all the windows of the Fields' house. They do not hear the groans. They see the grandeur of the stone, unaware that the foundation beneath it has already cracked. In 5 days, the heir will die. In 5 weeks, the king himself will die. The empire, built over 40 years, is beheaded in 1 month. But to understand how one shot destroyed the most powerful dynasty in the Midwest, we need to rewind time. We need to understand not how they died, but how they lived. And why Marshall Field Sr., a man who controlled every cent in his business, could not control the one thing that mattered. This is not a story about money. This is a story about the price paid for perfection. To understand why the shot in the dressing room became not just a tragedy, but the collapse of an entire era, we must leave Chicago at the beginning of the 20th century and travel back 70 years. To a place as far as possible from marble and gold. To the state of Massachusetts, to a rocky farm in the town of Conway. It is here, in 1834, that Marshall Field is born. He was not born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He was born with a plow in his hands. This is a fundamentally important point for understanding his psychology. Field is a product of Puritan New England. It is a world where poverty is considered a sin and wealth is a sign of divine blessing, but only if it is earned through grueling labor. His father, John Field, teaches him a simple truth. Emotions are a waste of energy. There is only work, duty, and results. Little Marshall absorbs this with his mother's milk. He grows up reserved, painfully shy, but with eyes that, as his competitors will later say, resembled 2 pieces of blue ice. They expressed nothing, but saw everything. At 17, he commits his first act of rebellion, which is actually an act of cold calculation. He leaves the farm. He understands that the soil of Massachusetts is depleted, and real money lies in the West. In 1856, with less than $1,000 in his pocket, he steps off the train in Chicago. In the mid-19th century, Chicago is not a city of skyscrapers. It is a dirty, stinking hole built on a swamp. The streets here are a mess of mud and manure, where horses sink up to their bellies. But the 21-year-old Marshall Field sees not the dirt. He sees a map. He sees that it is here that all the continent's railroad lines converge. It is the hub through which the grain, meat, and lumber of all America pass. He understands. If you control trade in Chicago, you control the nation's wallet. He gets a job as a clerk in a haberdashery store. He sleeps in the store itself to save on rent. He saves every cent, recording expenses in a small notebook that will become his Bible. He has no friends. He has no hobbies. He has a goal. In 4 years, he rises from junior salesman to partner in the firm. His method is simple. He knows more about the goods than the manufacturer, and he knows more about the customer than the customer himself. It is at this time that he forms his philosophy, which will revolutionize world trade. Before Field, shopping was a battle. There were no price tags. The seller assessed the buyer's clothes and named a price from the ceiling. If you looked rich, you paid 3 times more. Trade was deception. Field introduces a revolutionary, almost heretical idea: fixed pricing. One price tag for everyone, whether you are a banker's wife or a farmer's daughter. His second innovation sounds even crazier for that time: the ability to return goods. "Give the lady what she wants," he tells his clerks. This is not altruism. This is cynical, brilliant calculation. He understands that trust is worth more than momentary profit. He is not building a store. He is building a temple of consumption, where the customer feels safe. But the real test of strength comes in 1871, October 8th, the Great Chicago Fire. The fire devours the city. Wooden sidewalks ignite like matches. People flee to the lake in panic, abandoning their possessions. Bankers shoot themselves, watching their safes burn. Marshall Field does not run at this moment. He acts like a general on the battlefield. While his competitors save personal jewels, Field hires all available carts and carriages. He pays cab drivers insane amounts, $100 an hour, to haul the most expensive fabrics and silks out of his store. His store burns to the ground, but his goods are saved. While the city is still smoking, while the ashes are still hot, Field opens a temporary store in an old streetcar depot. He is the only one operating. He has no competitors because the competitors are ruined. After the fire, his fortune multiplies. He becomes not just rich, he becomes the King of Chicago. It is during this period, as Field cements his status as a living god of trade, that a quiet drama unfolds in his personal life, which will lead to the shot 30 years later. His wife, Nanny Scott, is a fragile woman prone to melancholy. She lives in a golden cage. Field Sr. provides her with everything except warmth. In 1868, they have a son, Marshall Field Jr. The boy is born weak. He is the complete opposite of his father. Field Sr. is granite. Field Jr. is porcelain. From early childhood, the heir feels the weight of expectations on him. He is not just a child. He is the next head of the corporation Marshall Field and Company. The father looks at him not as a son, but as a successor who is failing in his role. Field Sr. hates weakness. He despises idleness. He raised himself, enduring hunger and deprivation, and he cannot understand why his son, who has been given everything, does not show the same predatory grip. In the house on Prairie Avenue, an atmosphere of cold alienation reigns. Father and son live in different worlds. The father builds an empire, absorbing competitors and buying up real estate. He becomes the largest taxpayer in the USA, surpassing even the Rockefellers in certain years. He funds the creation of the University of Chicago, builds museums. He wants the name Field to mean Chicago. And the son? The son grows up in the shadow of this colossus. Marshall Jr. tries to find himself. He studies at Harvard, but does not shine with success. He tries to go into business, but he lacks his father's killer instinct. He suffers from chronic headaches, insomnia, and inexplicable fatigue. Modern psychologists would call it clinical depression, but in the Victorian era, it is called nervous weakness. By the beginning of the 20th century, the rift between them becomes catastrophic. Field Sr. is an icon. He is the embodiment of the American dream. He is a staunch conservative, hating unions, despising socialists, believing in order and hierarchy. He believes that the poor are poor because they are lazy. Marshall Jr., on the other hand, feels like a stranger in this world of iron logic. He seeks solace, and he finds it not in sales reports, but in another world that his father despises, in the world that begins where respectable Chicago ends. This is how the foundation of the tragedy is laid. On one side is the father, who turned his name into a brand demanding absolute purity and perfection. On the other is the son, who breaks under the weight of this brand. Between them are unspoken grievances, disappointment, and millions of dollars that bring no happiness. Field Sr. built a perfect machine for making money, but he forgot to build a family. He thought that discipline could replace love and wealth could replace meaning. But history was preparing to teach him a lesson that even the strongest walls of red sandstone cannot protect from inner emptiness. And when Marshall Field Jr. meets a woman who categorically does not fit his father's standards, this smoldering conflict receives the spark needed for explosion. This is not just a romance. This is a clash of two cultures, two Chicagos that should never have intersected. 1890. Chicago is at the peak of its Gilded Age. At this moment in Marshall Field Jr.'s life, an event occurs that should have been his triumph, but became the catalyst for his downfall. He announces his engagement. His chosen one is Albertina Huck. For a modern viewer, this is just a name. But for Chicago at the end of the 19th century, it is a social explosion. Albertina is the daughter of Lewis Huck, a wealthy malt and beer producer. Here passes the invisible but ironclad boundary of the American elite. On one side, the Fields, Anglo-Saxons, Presbyterians, clean money from selling goods. On the other, the Hucks, German roots, Catholics, dirty money from alcohol. For the Puritan Marshall Field Sr., who banned the sale of alcohol in his department store and curtained the windows on Sundays, this union is a challenge. A Catholic in the Field family? A brewer's daughter? This is a misalliance. But Field Sr. is a pragmatist. He needs an heir. He needs the continuation of the dynasty. He gives cold consent. The wedding took place in October 1890. It was the merger of two capitals, two worlds. Newspapers described it as a fairy tale, but behind the facade of the celebration hid a deal. Marshall Field Jr., the eternal child, finally receives the attributes of an adult man: a wife, social status, and, most importantly, his own house. It is here that the main inanimate character of our tragedy enters the stage, the object that became the crime scene. Mansion at Prairie Avenue, 1919. Prairie Avenue of that time is not just a street. It is the most expensive real estate west of New York. Here live the Pullmans, railroad cars, Armours, meatpacking, Glessners, agricultural machinery. 70 families owning 90% of Chicago's wealth live on a stretch of 6 blocks. Marshall Field Sr. already lives here, in house number 1905. For his son and daughter-in-law, he acquires the neighboring house, number 1919. This magnificent structure of red brick and terracotta, designed by the famous architect Solon Berman. The house is the architectural embodiment of expectations. 3 stories, high ceilings, interiors finished with mahogany and marble. It is a fortress. But unlike medieval castles, this fortress must protect not from armies, but from reality. Field Sr. gifts this house to his son with intent. It is a golden leash. Marshall Jr. now lives just a few houses from his father. He is under watch. Every morning he must go to work at Marshall Field and Company. and every evening returned to the house bought with his father's money, to the wife approved by his father, even if grudgingly. But the marriage to Albertina changes the dynamic. Albertina is a woman with character. She brings into Field Jr.'s life something he never had, a zest for life. They travel to Europe. They host receptions. They have children, 3, including the future publisher Marshall Field III. For several years, it seems, the strategy worked. Junior Field looks happy. He plays the role of the model family man. He tries to live up to the image his father painted for him. But it's a facade. Inside the mansion at Prairie Avenue 1919, a psychological vacuum begins to form. Marshall Jr. still has no real power in the company. He is a decorative figure. He comes to the office, sits at the desk, but decisions are made by the old man. At 30, he is still a gopher for the genius. It is during this period, in the early 1900s, that a transformation of the city's geography occurs, which will play a fatal role. Chicago grows too fast. The elite Prairie Avenue district finds itself in a vice. From the east, the railroad presses in, and from the west, just a few blocks away, the city's cancerous tumor begins to spread. The Levee District. The Levee is the capital of vice in North America. 200 brothels, thousands of prostitutes, gambling houses, opium dens, and the jewel of this underworld, Everly Club. The contrast is murderous. On Prairie Avenue, in the Fields house, they discuss opera and stock reports. And a 10-minute walk away, in the Everly Club, champagne flows like a river from dancers' shoes, and European princes incognito lose fortunes. 2 worlds, the world of the father's Puritan morality and the world of forbidden pleasures. And Marshall Field Jr. finds himself squeezed between them. His house is a border outpost. The father demands impeccability. The wife demands attention. Society demands conformity. The pressure builds. Accounts from that time say that Junior's health deteriorates. He complains of neuralgia. Doctors prescribe laudanum, opium tincture, the standard painkiller of that era. This is the beginning of the end. The house at 1919 stops being a family nest. It turns into a facade behind which the heir hides his double life. While Albertina tends to the children and charity, Marshall Jr. begins to disappear. First for hours, then for evenings. Where does he go? Officially, to a gentleman's club or business meetings. But Chicago is a city where the walls have ears. Rumors begin to creep through the city like fog from the lake. Rumors that the son of the king of retail has found a place where he is not judged by his surname. A place where he is simply a man with money, not the disappointment of a great father. By November 1905, the tension reaches its limit. The mansion stands magnificent and unshakable, shining with electric light. But inside, its master is a man on the brink of breakdown. The strategic marriage that was supposed to strengthen the dynasty and the luxurious house that was supposed to be a symbol of success have turned into a golden cage. And the door of this cage was open. But it led not to freedom, but straight to hell. Located at South Dearborn Street, 2131. To the Everly Club. We enter the mansion at Prairie Avenue, 1919. To understand the tragedy of Marshall Field Jr., we must understand the space in which he lived. These are not just walls. This is a psychological map of his mind. Architect Solon Spencer Beeman created this house, not for comfort. He created it as a monument to stability. When you cross the threshold, the first thing that stuns you is the silence. Massive oak doors cut off street noise, lake wind, and the rumble of wagons. You enter a vacuum. The vestibule is paneled with dark red wood. The light here does not pour, it seeps through heavy draperies. Every detail of the interior screams old money. There is no flashy gilding of the nouveau riche. Here reigns restrained, oppressive luxury. The furniture is imported from Europe. It smells of wax and centuries. Every vase, every painting on the wall asserts, "We are here forever." Psychologically, this house is an extension of the father. Field Sr. lives across the street, but his spirit permeates his son's home. The space is organized hierarchically. On the first floor are grand reception halls, where Marshall Jr. is obliged to play the role of successful heir. On the second are bedrooms and private rooms, where he is left alone with his insomnia. Let us pause on the details of the dressing room. It is here that the shot will ring out. This is a small room, a buffer zone between the bedroom and the outside world. Here, a man removes one mask and puts on another. The mirrors in this room reflect not only the face, but also the emptiness in the eyes. Here, weapons are stored. A collection of rifles and revolvers, an attribute of masculinity expected of him, but one that, in his father's opinion, he did not possess. But this architectural portrait has a dark side. If the mansion on Prairie Avenue is the superego, the embodiment of duty and conscience, then 20 blocks away is the architectural embodiment of the id, pure, unrestrained instincts.
This is the Everly Club, South Dearborn Street, 2131.
This is not a dirty dive. It is a mirror image of the Field Mansion, its perverted twin. Sisters Minna and Ada Everly invested $200,000 in the interiors of their establishment, an astronomical sum, equivalent today to $6 million. If the Field House is dark wood and silence, then the Everly Club is velvet, gold, and music. Visitors are greeted by a grand staircase carpeted with rugs in which the foot sinks. The air here smells not of wax, but of expensive French perfumes and fresh roses, which are changed every morning. The center of this world is the Golden Room. Here stands a piano covered in gold leaf, costing $15,000. Here, fountains play, into which, according to legend, champagne was poured at parties. The walls are hung with mirrors, creating the illusion of infinite pleasure. Entry to this paradise costs $50, so you understand the scale. The average worker in Chicago earns $10 a week.
One visit here cost as much as 1.5 months of grueling labor at the stockyards. This price is a filter. It guarantees that here, Marshall Field Jr. will meet only his own, the elite, captains of industry, judges, and politicians. But here they are without ties. Here they are real. The psychological contrast between these two buildings tears the heir's soul apart. In the mansion on Prairie Avenue, he is Marshall Field's son, eternal disappointment, the pale shadow of a great father. The house walls press on him with the demand to conform. Every dinner with his wife under the light of a crystal chandelier is an exam that he fails. In the Everly Club, he is simply Marshall. Or perhaps he has a pseudonym. Here he is valued not for his surname, but for his generosity. The Everly courtesans are the most educated and beautiful women of the demi-monde in America. They know how to listen. They know how to create the illusion that you are the most important man in the world. For a man with chronically low self-esteem, this drug is stronger than opium. Field Jr. begins to live on a pendulum. By day, the cold geometry of his father's business and the primness of his own home. By night, the golden chaos of the Everly Club. This pendulum swings for years. But by the fall of 1905, the amplitude becomes critical. The architecture of his life collapses. The house on Prairie Avenue becomes unbearable, like a prison cell.
And the Everly Club ceases to be just entertainment. It becomes a necessity. In the dressing room of the Field Mansion, not only suits are stored. There is stored the tension of a man who understands that he lives a lie. The house, built by Solon Beeman, was designed to stand for centuries, but the psyche of its owner was built from much more fragile material. On November 22nd, these two worlds, the world of duty and the world of desire, will collide. And this collision will occur not in metaphysical space, but through a .32 caliber lead bullet. When we look at photographs of the mansion from that time, we see a fortress. But now we know. Inside this fortress was locked a man who desperately sought an exit. And he found it. But the price of the exit turned out to be higher than the membership fee at America's most expensive club. By November 1905, Marshall Field Jr. approaches the edge of the abyss. He is 37 years old. By the standards of that time, this is the age of bloom, the age when a man takes the reins of power into his own hands. But Field Jr. holds nothing in his hands except a glass of whiskey and a syringe with painkiller. Here we encounter a profound human tragedy, hidden behind dry newspaper headlines. It is easy to write off the heir's behavior as spoiledness. It is easy to call him the weak link in the steel chain of Field DNA. But let us look at the situation from the point of view of psychological pressure that has no analogues. Imagine that your name is not just a set of sounds. It is a brand that stands on every corner. You walk down the street and see your name on delivery vans. You open the newspaper and see your name in headlines about economic growth. You do not belong to yourself. You are a function. Marshall Field Sr. was not just a father. He was Chicago's living deity. Trying to surpass him is impossible. Trying to become different means betraying the family. Marshall Jr. lives in a state of permanent cognitive dissonance. Outwardly, he is a prince. He has a beautiful wife, Albertina, 3 healthy children, the best house on the street. Internally, he is emptiness. His marriage, which began as a strategic alliance and a challenge to his father, is cracking at the seams. Albertina is a strong, willful woman. She sees her husband fading. She sees him turning into a shadow. And her strength only underscores his weakness. In the house on Prairie Avenue, he feels like an extra element. The wife manages the household. The father manages the money. And what does he do? It is here that a figure appears who usually remains off-screen in official biographies, but without whom this story is incomplete. Minna Everly. Minna Everly, the owner of that very club, was not just a trader in flesh. She was the smartest woman of her time, cynical but perceptive. Testimonies of contemporaries and indirect evidence suggest that Field Jr.'s relationship with the Everly Club went beyond that of a simple client. In this house of vice, he found what was absent in his father's cold mansion: understanding. Minna did not demand that he be the king of retail. To her, he was simply a man who was hurting. This creates a powerful moral conflict. Who is the real hero here, and who is the villain? The father, who demands impossible perfection from his son for the sake of the public good? Or the fallen woman, who gives this son the only consolation? Society of 1905 would give a clear answer. We today see the tragedy of loneliness. On November 22nd, this abscess bursts. The morning of that Wednesday begins as usual. Marshall Jr. is in his mansion, but his thoughts are far away. He knows that his father is planning another expansion. He knows that he will again be required to be present, to smile, to sign. The pressure becomes physically unbearable. There is a theory, supported by the whisper of servants, that on this day there was a quarrel, possibly with his father, possibly with his wife. The theme of the quarrel is always the same: failure to meet expectations. You must be a field. This phrase, like a whip, drives him to where he cannot be a field. If we believe the unofficial version, after lunch he heads to the Everly Club. He seeks oblivion. But there, in the golden rooms, something goes wrong. Was it a conflict with another patron? Or an accidental shot in a drunken haze? Or, most terribly, a suicide attempt that was interrupted but could not prevent the wound? Here arises the moral ambivalence of the character himself. Marshall Field Jr. is not an innocent victim. He betrayed his wife. He betrayed his father's principles. He led a double life, risking the reputation of the entire family. Can he be justified? We see a man who broke. His actions are not deliberate vice, but a cry for help that no one wanted to hear. He tried to kill the pain inside himself, but in the end, killed himself. If we accept the official version of the accident in the dressing room, the tragedy becomes even sharper. Imagine him standing in front of the mirror with a revolver in his hand. He is not cleaning it. He is staring at the barrel. He thinks about whether there is an exit. In this version, there is no trip to the brothel. There is only a lonely man in a huge empty house who plays with death, trying to feel something other than the endless pressure of duty. Accidental shot or deliberate trigger pull? The boundary is blurred. In psychology, there is a concept of suicidal behavior without explicit intent. A person behaves so riskily that death becomes a logical outcome. Cleaning a loaded weapon pointed at the stomach, this is exactly that behavior. This is Russian roulette that he played with fate. And at this moment, at 5:30 p.m., fate says yes. The bullet enters the body. Pain tears through the veil of depression. And here, the most terrible thing happens. At the moment of mortal wounding, when a person should think about saving the soul or saying goodbye to loved ones, around him begins not a rescue operation, but a cover-up operation. If he was in the brothel, they take him home, bleeding out, shaking in the carriage over cobblestones, losing precious minutes. Why? Because reputation is more important than life. Because Marshall Field cannot die in a brothel. If he was at home, the servants do not call the police. They call lawyers and loyal doctors. Marshall Field Jr. becomes a hostage to his name, even at the moment of death. He cannot simply die as a man. He must die as a symbol. His agony becomes an administrative problem that needs to be solved. This is the essence of the human tragedy of this story. This is not just the death of a rich heir. This is a sacrifice on the altar of success. Field Sr., this titan, this genius, this voice of God in the world of trade, at this moment makes his most terrible choice. He chooses to save face, even if the price is the agonizing death of his only son, in a lie. The moral compass of this story is broken. We do not know whom to sympathize with: the father who loses the future, the son who lost the present, or the women, the wife and the mistress, who remain amid the ruins. The shot has rung out. The body lies on the floor. Blood soaks into the carpet. But the real drama is just beginning. 5 days, exactly 120 hours. This is how long the agony lasts in the mansion on Prairie Avenue. From November 22nd to November 27th, 1905, time in house number 1919 stops. Outside the windows, Chicago continues to roar. Trains come and go, stock quotes fluctuate. Thousands of shoppers storm the Marshall Field and Company department store, preparing for Christmas. But inside the heir's bedroom, only the hoarse, intermittent sound of a dying man's breathing is heard. This is the culmination of the crisis. Here, at his son's bedside, Marshall Field Sr. confronts the one enemy he cannot buy, intimidate, or absorb: biology. The city's best doctors, including Dr. Frank Billings, are powerless. The .32 caliber bullet has done its work. It carried infection. Peritonitis develops rapidly. In the era before penicillin, this is a death sentence carried out slowly and agonizingly. On November 27th, a Monday, around 4 p.m., Marshall Field Jr. dies. At this moment, a strange transformation occurs. The death of a man is instantly overshadowed by the birth of a legend.
As soon as the heir's heart makes its last beat, an administrative resource of incredible power is activated. Cook County Coroner Peter Hoffman was supposed to conduct an investigation. By law, any death from a gunshot wound requires an autopsy and police inquest. But the law in Chicago in 1905 bends under the weight of gold. Marshall Field Sr. uses all his influence. No autopsy is performed. Police detectives who could have asked questions about the bullet's trajectory or rumors regarding the Everly Club are not even allowed into the room. The official inquest lasts a farcically short time. The verdict is issued right in the mansion: accidental shooting while cleaning a weapon. No witnesses except family, no evidence except what the family decided to show. Chicago newspapers, dependent on the advertising budgets of Field's department store, print this version word for word. This is the triumph of control over truth. But this triumph becomes the beginning of the end for Field Sr. himself. At his son's funeral, the king of retail does not look like a victor. Eyewitnesses describe him as a man from whom the steel rod has been removed. He is 71 years old. All his life, he built a pyramid at whose apex his lineage was supposed to stand. And now he stands at an open grave in Graceland Cemetery and sees in it not just his son's body. He sees in it the collapse of his immortality. The external crisis, the death of the heir, triggers the patriarch's deepest internal crisis. For the first time in his life, his philosophy of work and discipline fails. Money did not save his son from depression. Influence did not save his son from the bullet. And total control over information cannot erase the truth from the father's own memory. He knows what really happened. Whether it was a suicidal game in the dressing room or the dirty secret of a brothel, he knows that his empire is built on sand. After the funeral, Marshall Field Sr. tries to return to the only thing he understands: to routine. He tries to convince himself and the world that the system is functioning normally. The grandchildren, Marshall III and Henry, are still children, but they exist. The dynasty will continue. He just needs to keep working. However, fate prepares the final, cynical blow. On January 1st, 1906, just 35 days after his son's death, Marshall Field Sr. decides to play golf. It is a tradition. He plays with his nephew and Robert Todd Lincoln, the son of the assassinated President Abraham Lincoln. The game takes place at the Chicago Golf Club. The weather is deceptive. The sun shines, but the wind from the lake is icy and the ground is frozen. This is a surreal picture. The richest man in the city, who has just lost his son, swings the club at a small white ball, trying to prove that he is still alive, that he is still in the game.
But his immunity, undermined by the monstrous stress of the past weeks, is at zero. The next day, he develops a cough. Doctors diagnose a severe cold, which quickly turns into pneumonia. Events unfold with frightening symmetry. The same house, the same doctors, the same whispers of servants. Only now, the emperor himself is dying in the bedroom. On January 16, 1906, less than 8 weeks after the shot that killed his son, Marshall Field Sr. dies. Chicago is in shock. The city cannot believe that such a boulder can disappear so quickly. Newspapers come out with mourning borders. The exchange reacts with a drop. But behind the official mourning hides a mystical horror. People begin to talk about the Field curse. It seems that the shot in the dressing room, or in the brothel, triggered a chain reaction that destroyed the top of the food chain. The death of Field Sr. changes the context of the entire story. If he had survived and ruled for another 10 years, the son's death would have been just a tragic episode in the magnate's biography. But their almost simultaneous departure turns the story into an ancient tragedy. The father, who sacrificed everything for the legacy, dies without passing it on. Now, only one key character remains on the stage. The one no one took seriously. Albertina, the widow. It is at this moment that the true transformation occurs. The woman whom Field Sr. tolerated only as a necessary evil, the Catholic from a family of new money, suddenly becomes the only adult person amid the ruins of the empire. She does not break. She takes the children and leaves. She takes them from gloomy Chicago to England. She understands what the king of retail did not understand. This city, this house, and this money are toxic. The death of the two marshals becomes a bifurcation point. The enormous fortune, more than $100 million, equivalent to billions today, hangs in the air. Field Sr.'s will is written so cunningly that the grandchildren will gain access to the main funds only after 40 years. He wanted to control them even from the grave. He wanted to protect the capital from squandering. But he could not protect the capital from history. The crisis of 1905 destroyed the people, but left the money. And this money, deprived of its master, began to live its own strange life. The mansion on Prairie Avenue, 1919, stood empty. The windows in which light burned on the night of the tragedy went dark. The house turned into a cenotaph, an empty tomb. But the story does not end here. The death of the Titans opened the way to something else, to the question that echoes through the century. What remains of a person when his business disappears? Does the memory of his innovations remain, or only the echo of a shot in a closed room? Today, if you come to Chicago and walk down Prairie Avenue, you will not hear the echo of carriages or see the sparkle of diamonds. The street that was once the main artery of American wealth is quiet today. Most of the palaces have been demolished. From the grandeur of the Gilded Age, only a few museums and empty lots overgrown with grass remain. The mansion numbered 1919, where the fatal shot rang out, no longer exists in the form the Fields knew it. After the death of her husband and father-in-law, Albertina Huck, this inconvenient daughter-in-law, committed an act that finally separated her from the philosophy of accumulation. She did not live in this mausoleum. She gave it away. The house was transferred to charitable organizations, becoming a rehabilitation center. The walls that were supposed to protect the elite from the rabble became a shelter for the needy. This was irony worthy of the pen of a great novelist. The fortress of capitalism turned into a house of mercy. But what happened to the money? to those very $100 million for which Marshall Field Sr. sacrificed his relationship with his son. History disposed of them with sarcasm.
The patriarch's will was drawn up so that the capital would accumulate for decades before reaching the hands of the grandchildren. Field Sr. wanted to create a dynasty that would rule forever. But his grandson, Marshall Field III, gaining access to the inheritance in the mid-20th century, became the complete opposite of his grandfather. Marshall Field I was a staunch conservative who hated change. Marshall Field III became a progressive liberal. He used his grandfather's millions to fund the Chicago Sun newspaper, which fought for workers' rights and supported Roosevelt's New Deal. Money squeezed from the harsh capitalist system of the 19th century went toward reforming it in the 20th century. If the king of retail could see this from his grave, he would die a second time. And what about the Everly Club, the shadowy participant in our drama? Its fate was also predetermined. In 1911, just 6 years after the shot, the club was closed. The irony is that the campaign against the red light district was led by the very people who visited it at night. The era's hypocrisy slammed shut the doors of the Golden Brothel, and soon the building itself was demolished. Today, in its place, is faceless urban development. From the place where, perhaps, the fate of the field heir was decided, not even a foundation remains. The empire of Marshall Field and Company stores lasted the longest. For 100 years, the green clocks at the corner of State Street were a meeting place for lovers. The brand became synonymous with Chicago. But in 2006, the corporate machine, devoid of sentimentality, swallowed this too. The Macy's company bought the chain and erased Marshall Field's name from the facades. Thousands of Chicagoans protested, but business is business. The name that Field Sr. protected at the cost of his son's life was painted over in one night because the shareholders decided so. This story is not just a chronicle of one rich family. It is a mirror we should look into today. We live in an era remarkably similar to the Gilded Age. We see again the colossal gap between rich and poor. We see again the cult of successful success, where people on social media broadcast an ideal picture of life, hiding behind filters, depression, loneliness, and fear of inadequacy. Marshall Field Jr. is the archetype of the modern burnout victim. He was the first involuntary influencer. He had everything: status, resources, looks, but he had no right to error and no right to his own self. His tragedy teaches us that the psychological pressure of concrete expectations breaks a person faster than physical need. You can live in a house with 30 rooms, but if you feel like a stranger in it, it is simply a very large and expensive prison. In literature, there is a hero with whom the tycoons of that era are often compared: J. Gatsby. Gatsby believed that the past could be rewritten and the future bought. Marshall Field Sr. believed the same. He thought that if an ideal facade was built, life inside would also become ideal. But, as in Fitzgerald's novel, reality proved cruel. Gatsby died in a pool, lonely in his greatness. Marshall Field Jr. died in his dressing room, or in a brothel, which is essentially also a symbol of loneliness, crushed by the weight of his own name. The difference is only that Gatsby chased a dream, while the Fields chased control. And history showed, control is an illusion. You can control the grain market, you can control the city hall, you can control the press, but you cannot control the flight of a .32 caliber bullet. And you cannot make your own son happy by your command. Today, at Graceland Cemetery in Chicago, stands the Field Memorial. It is not just a headstone. It is the sculptural composition Memory by Daniel Chester French, the same sculptor who created the Lincoln statue in Washington. A bronze woman sits in thought, gazing into nowhere.
There are no angels or crosses nearby, only silence and reflection. Here lie both of them, the father who wanted to become a god, and the son who simply wanted to be a human. After 120 years, their conflict is exhausted. The earth has equalized their ambitions. The story of the tragedy of the king of retail leaves us with a question relevant to everyone building a career or creating capital. What is the price of your legacy? If for success you need to turn your heart into stone and your family into a corporation, is the game worth the candle? Marshall Fields Sr. left behind a fortune that today would be valued in billions. But when we speak of him, we do not remember his innovations in retail. We remember the winter evening, the sealed mansion, the smell of gunpowder, and the father standing over his dying son, trying to come up with a headline for the morning newspaper. Wealth can buy the best mahogany coffin, but it cannot buy immortality. And it certainly cannot buy the truth. Truth, like the grass on Prairie Avenue, always breaks through any asphalt, even the most expensive. This was the story of the fall of the House of Fields. A story about how the tallest towers cast the longest shadows. And sometimes, in these shadows, are lost those we love the most.